Snow fell soft on the roof of the abandoned house, settling like ash over a world already lost. The logs of the cabin groaned under its weight, old nails creaking in their rotted frames. Inside, where daylight filtered through a cracked window pane, a woman sat on the floor beside a dying fire, her knees drawn to her chest. One arm cradled the child, the other held its twin. They were quiet now, newborn girls swaddled in patched wool, mouths barely parted in sleep. Their breath came as mist, their noses pink with cold. She had named them without ceremony, alone but for the wind. Names whispered into the stillness, more prayer than announcement. Names no one would write down but her. Her name was Evelyn Merrow once. Married into the name at 17. Widowed by 19. Her husband, Edgar, was a man built for farming but not for fatherhood. He had died in the late harvest, caught between a wagon and the will of a startled mule. No blood, no screams, just stillness, and her too pregnant to even run to him without falling to her knees. The town said it was a tragedy. The in-laws said it was God's punishment for marrying a girl raised wild, half Lakota by blood, raised on the edge of Dust Creek by a quiet mother who never learned to read but could track deer through snow that no man could follow. They said Evelyn was bad luck before she'd ever been given a fair chance. And now, alone in the shell of a house Edgar had promised would be finished before winter, Evelyn knew those whispers had teeth. His family had come once after the burial, standing stiff in black coats with hollow eyes. They looked at her belly, not her. When she told them, the doctor said twins. His mother had turned away like Evelyn had spit in the church pews. No one returned after that. No basket of bread. No help with the woodpile. Just one letter, handed off by a boy who ran back to his horse the moment she opened the door. It had been folded twice and sealed with candle wax. Inside were 6 lines. 6 cold, perfect lines. If they are boys, we'll talk. If not, you'd best not come back to town. That was a month ago. The fire cracked and slumped into coals. Evelyn shifted the girls against her chest, heart beating louder than the wind. She hadn't eaten meat in 2 days. The rabbit traps lay buried beneath snow. She burned part of the cradle Edgar had carved from pine. He'd never finished the legs. The unfinished things were always the ones that haunted her most. A draft crept through the cracks between floorboards. One of the babies whimpered in her sleep. Evelyn pulled them tighter, wrapping her shawl around the 3 of them as one. Her back ached. Her feet were numb. Still, she sang. A broken melody, part English lullaby, part Lakota hum. The kind her mother used to hum over corn boiling on a fire, long before Evelyn ever knew what a dowry was, or how a man might hold a woman like a promise he wouldn't keep. It was not the cold that frightened her now. It was the silence. The kind that settled like ice in the lungs. The kind that meant no one was coming. She wasn't bitter. Not exactly. Bitterness was something sharp. She felt more like snow melt, too soft, too slow, slipping through cracks. The girls didn't cry much. That scared her more than anything. They were too quiet, too light in her arms, as if the world had already begun erasing them. A log popped. Sparks rose and fell. Evelyn leaned back against the timber wall and closed her eyes. She dreamed of thunder. Not the sky kind, but hoofbeats. Distant, rumbling. She jerked upright, breath caught, hand instantly on the rusted carving knife beside her bedroll. Then she realized it wasn't a dream. The sound was real, muffled by snow, but growing. Hoofbeats. 2, maybe 3 horses, coming fast down the hollow. Her blood turned to ice. She rose slowly, setting the girls in a cradle of blankets near the hearth. One stirred, but neither cried. Evelyn moved to the door, every step deliberate. Her legs were shaking, but not from cold. She peered through a gap in the wall. 3 riders. Broad hats. Long coats. One carried a torch. She knew them. Edgar's cousins. Evelyn's throat went dry. Her heart pounded, so loud it filled her ears. They weren't here to talk. Not with fire in hand. She reached for the knife, then paused. What good was a blade against 3 men? What good was she? Behind her, the girls rustled. One let out a small, breathless wail. Evelyn turned, just long enough to whisper to them, "I'll be right back." She crossed to the door and opened it. The cold slapped her like a bitter palm. The riders stopped 10 yards from the porch. Their horses steamed in the snowlight, their faces shadowed beneath the wide brims. The man with the torch raised it high. "You should have gone east when you had the chance," he said, voice thick with whiskey and something older. "This land ain't yours. You had no sons. That's the law." Evelyn stepped onto the porch barefoot, knife at her side. "There was no law when your cousin left me here to rot," she said quietly. He sneered. "You brought this on yourself. Dirty blood. Weak womb." Another voice behind him. "Should have drowned them at birth." Her hand clenched the knife tighter. Her breath steamed out slow. One rider dismounted, walking toward her. Then, before her voice could even rise, something changed. The horses reared. Not from command, from fear. A shadow slipped from the tree-line behind the house. Silent, fast. A figure in buckskins, hair braided in raven cords, face painted in the tones of winter bark and ash. The man didn't yell, didn't raise a war cry. Just stepped forward, bow strung, an arrow nocked, his eyes lit like flint. The rider froze mid-stride. Evelyn couldn't breathe. The Apache man didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. The snow around him fell undisturbed, as though even winter respected him. The rider cursed, spat, then turned back. The torch was dropped, half buried in slush. The other two didn't argue. They turned and fled into the dusk. Evelyn stood motionless. The man approached slowly, carefully, as one might approach a wounded doe. He nodded once, then past her. Not into the house, but to the girls. He knelt, checked their breathing, wrapped their blankets tighter. Evelyn didn't ask who he was. She didn't need to. Somehow, she already knew. She stepped down from the porch and followed him into the snow. Whatever had broken, whatever had burned, it wasn't the end. Not yet. The wind changed first. Evelyn smelled smoke before she saw flame, an acrid ribbon curling through the trees, coiling low like a warning whispered too late. The sky had not yet lightened, but she was already awake, her body too trained by hunger and fear to ever truly rest. She crouched by the cave's narrow mouth, snow crusted to her boots, listening. Behind her, the twins slept nestled in furs, their breath warm against each other's skin. The Apache man, she still didn't know his name, sat nearby, sharpening a blade with movements so measured they seemed part of nature itself. He had not spoken since the night he pulled her from the half-burned house. He moved like a shadow, but tended the fire like it was sacred, placing each log with care, ensuring the girls were always closest to the heat. She had watched him for 3 days now, trying to learn the rhythms of his silence. But this morning, even the fire felt tense. Evelyn turned her face toward the hills. The smoke was closer now, not from a chimney, not from brush. Controlled fire was steady. This was restless, wind-blown, and wrong. She moved back into the cave, brushing snow from her skirt, and gently woke him with a hand to his shoulder. He opened his eyes without surprise, as if he'd been waiting. "They're coming," she whispered. He nodded once, already wrapping his coat. He moved to the edge of the cave and crouched, watching. His body stilled completely. She followed the line of his gaze. Just at the far slope, where the trees parted like pulled curtains, 3 riders emerged. No pretense of stealth. They rode with torches held high, flames licking skyward. Evelyn recognized the lead man by the shape of his coat, a long duster lined in red fox fur. Edgar's uncle, a man who called himself righteous, but whose hands had once gripped her wrist hard enough to leave a bruise for days. Her breath hitched. They were riding toward the cave. She turned to gather the girls, lifting them together in the fur bundle, trying to keep her hands from trembling. They stirred, but did not cry. She kissed the crown of each head and tucked them deeper into the warmth. When she turned back, the Apache was gone. Her heart dropped until she saw the faintest shadow slip into the trees, as fluid as river mist. He was not fleeing. He was preparing. Evelyn pressed herself to the cave wall, knife in hand, though she knew it was laughable. She had no plan, no weapons that could match torches and rifles. All she had was resolve. The horses stopped below the cave, and she heard them dismount. 3 men. One young, jittery. One squat and broad. The last was Uncle Thomas, calm as always, which made him the most dangerous of all. He didn't shout. He walked toward the mouth of the cave like it was his own front porch, torch held high. "Evelyn," he called, voice low and syrup thick. "Come on out now. There's no need to play wild. Let's end this decent." She stayed still, breath tucked behind her teeth. He took another step. "We brought rope, not bullets. You'll come with us, the babes too. We'll find them better homes." At that, something in her snapped. She stepped from the cave, knife drawn, eyes blazing. The snow took her boots, made her stumble, but she righted herself with a fire she hadn't known she still had. "They already have a home," she said, voice flat as frost. Thomas blinked. "A cave in a canyon? You call that living? I call it safer than anywhere you offered." His mouth twisted. "You got no land, no name left worth dirt. All you've got is shame and 2 mouths to feed. I'd rather starve with them than hand them to men like you." That got a twitch from the youngest. He looked away. Thomas stepped forward. "You're not thinking straight. Grief will do that. You weren't born for this kind of life." "You mean I wasn't born to survive it?" she said. That stopped him. For a heartbeat, silence swelled. Then the squat one, Jeb, she thought, stepped toward her. She stalling. A rustle. A snap. The Apache dropped from the trees like a hawk, silent as snow. One moment he was sky and branch, the next he was behind Jeb with a blade drawn clean across the man's coat. Not touching. Not yet. The men froze. The Apache's bow came up next, an elegant, deadly arc drawn so tight the string sang. The arrow pointed straight at Thomas's throat. No one spoke. Evelyn's breath steamed out slowly. She stepped back toward the cave, inch by inch, never turning her back. Thomas's face soured. "This how you survive now," he sneered. "Hiding behind one of them?" Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't need to. The Apache man didn't flinch, didn't lower the bow. He was a statue carved to winter. Thomas spat in the snow. "You think this ends it? You'll be hunted. You'll be called traitor." Still no one moved. "I'll tell the sheriff. I'll tell the reverend. Let the town decide what to do with you." Evelyn's voice was quiet. "They already did." She stepped into the cave. The babies rustled softly. The Apache waited another long second before easing the bowstring and disappearing again into the trees, like smoke vanishing between branches. The riders left without another word. Back inside, Evelyn sat near the fire, pulled her daughters into her lap, and didn't speak for a long time. The Apache returned at dusk. No words. Just placed a warm root bundle near the hearth and fed the fire 3 more logs. She met his eyes then. Really met them. There was no pity in his gaze. No curiosity. Just calm. As if he knew what it was to be hunted for simply surviving. That night, Evelyn did not cry. She fed the twins in silence, wrapped their tiny bodies in her shawl, and lay close enough to feel their breath. Outside, the snow began again, soft, steady, unbothered by fire or men. The Apache man slept sitting up, one hand still resting on the hilt of his knife. Evelyn watched the sparks rise and disappear. Her old life had burned, but something else had started here. In silence, in snow, in the choice to stay. She wasn't rescued. Not really. But she wasn't alone anymore. The scent of cedar hung in the air, rich and steady, winding through the narrow walls of the canyon like a hymn hummed beneath breath. Smoke trailed from a small fire tucked in a stone ring, its flame low and respectful. It was a quiet place, and that mattered more than warmth. Evelyn had lost count of how many days had passed since the riders. Time had softened, like snow thawing into spring water. She moved through the hours gently, with purpose but no urgency. There were no clocks in the canyon, only wind, birdsong, and the tiny sounds her daughters made when they dreamed. The Apache man, still without a name, remained close but never too close. He built things. That's what she noticed first. Little things. A windbreak of branches woven tight like basket reeds. A narrow trench to drain snow melt from the cave entrance. Hooks carved into stone to hold their wet clothes. It was as though he saw the world not as it was, but how it could serve others if shaped with care. He never asked for thanks. When Evelyn left the cave one morning to find a cedar cradle had been carved, lashed together with rawhide and lined with rabbit fur, she nearly wept. She hadn't asked. He hadn't spoken. He'd simply watched her try to juggle two girls while cooking over fire and taken the burden into his own hands. She lowered the twins into it with reverence, brushing a hand over the smooth edge. Later that day, she found him seated near the creek that snaked through the rocks. He was sharpening his blade again, though she could see it needed nothing. It was his way of thinking, perhaps, keeping his hands busy so the silence didn't swell too large. She sat beside him, not speaking for a while, just listening to the slow movement of water. "I never learned his songs," she said softly, not looking at him. "My husband. He whistled sometimes. That's all." He didn't turn. "I think I knew, even before he died, that he didn't really see me. Not in the way a man sees a woman he loves." Still, he stayed quiet. She wrapped her arms around herself. "But the girls, they were the first time I didn't feel invisible. They look up at me like I matter, like I was meant to exist." At that, he set the knife down. "You do," he said. It was the first word he had spoken since they met. Her breath caught. Not because of the word, but the way he said it, simple, unpolished, but certain. He looked at her then. His eyes were dark as obsidian and just as steady. In them, she saw no rescue, no charity, only truth, a kind of witnessing. She nodded, once, unsure what else to say. He turned back to the blade. Later that evening, he brought dried berries and smoked meat wrapped in cloth. She didn't ask where he'd gotten them. She only nodded in thanks, and shared what little tea she could make from pine needles and boiled snow. The girls cooed beside the fire, wrapped together in the cedar cradle. Their cheeks had gained color. Their cries were stronger now, tiny declarations that they were still here, still fighting to grow. One of them, the smaller, reached out that night and gripped his finger. He froze, unsure. Evelyn watched as he allowed her to hold it, his calloused hand utterly still, her tiny one curling around it like ivy. It was the most delicate thing she had ever seen. He didn't pull away. In the days that followed, the silence between them grew softer. Not filled, but familiar. Evelyn began to speak more often. Small memories, little thoughts, never pushed, never demanded. He listened. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes his eyes drifted to the fire, like he was placing each word in a room inside himself. She told him about her mother, how she taught Evelyn to read the wind before she could read a Bible, about the stories her grandfather whispered over deer bones, about the time Evelyn had wanted to be a teacher, but the town wouldn't allow it. Not with her blood. He told her his name one morning, just after sunrise. Tohi, peace. She said it out loud to be sure she had heard him right. He nodded. It fit him. The way he moved. The way he never rushed, never struck first. A man like still water, not empty, but deep. That evening, she caught her reflection in a puddle near the rocks and didn't recognize herself at first. Her face was leaner. Her eyes had lost their feverish wild. She looked alive. Weathered, yes, but awake. Her skin darkened by sun and wind, her hair in loose braids. A woman no longer waiting to be taken care of. A woman who had already survived the worst and kept on breathing. The girls had begun to laugh now, soft bubbling sounds that made her chest ache with sweetness. She swore one of them smiled at Tohi. He didn't smile back, not fully, but his eyes warmed in a way she had come to read like sunrise. That night, as the moon slid behind a veil of clouds, she sat beside him by the fire. The girls were asleep. "I don't know where we go from here," she murmured. "When the snow melts, when someone else comes. They always come." Tohi stirred the fire gently. "We build," he said. She looked at him. "We move up," he added, pointing toward a narrow ridge above a canyon. It was sheltered, with stone walls and a southern slope. She had seen him studying it before. Now she understood. "You'd stay?" she asked. He looked at the girls. "I stay." Evelyn exhaled slowly, heart thudding in unfamiliar rhythm. She didn't cry. She didn't speak again. She only nodded, letting the heat of the fire soak through her hands, letting the moment settle. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a promise. It was a beginning. The thaw came slowly that year, peeling back winter in quiet sheets. Ice loosened from branches like dead skin, and the creek ran thicker each morning, threading its way toward something braver than silence. Evelyn woke with the girls still pressed against her side, their limbs warm and sprawling now. Little animals learning how to stretch in the sunlight. Outside the cave, the ridge had begun to green. Tohi had already moved their sleeping pelts and cooking stones to the ledge he'd chosen weeks ago. The view opened wide there, the valley below stitched with pines and the blue ribbon of the water. Eagles circled above sometimes. They never called out, just glided on the hush. Tohi built without words. Each day he shaped the beginning of a home, stacking stone with care, setting post holes, weaving willow branches into a windscreen. Evelyn carried what she could. She planted roots too, left cedar needles beneath the cradle, sang to the girls while hanging shirts to dry on rope he strung between two trees. Her voice had returned, not loud, but present. She had grown stronger, not in the way settlers talked about strength, harsh and loud and full of boast, but in the way rivers wore down mountains, quietly, without permission. Then came the sound she had been waiting for, without knowing it. Voices, sharp and too many. She heard them before she saw them. Boots trampling wet ground, a dog barking once and silenced, a man laughing too loud for the woods. Tohi turned at the same moment she did. His body stilled. Not fear, just recognition. He reached for the knife tucked into his boot and nodded toward the rock wall where the girls lay napping. Evelyn tucked them quickly into the carry sling across her back. They stirred but didn't cry. Somehow, they always knew when not to. She turned to face the path, heart already thudding with a rhythm as old as running. 6 men climbed the ridge. 2 wore badges. One had a Bible tucked under his arm. Another wore a wide belt with her father-in-law's branding iron hanging like a trophy. They stopped just beyond the reach of the fire ring. The tallest, Sheriff Dalton, tilted his hat and gave her a look that might have passed for kindness if it hadn't been wrapped around judgment. "Mrs. Marrow," he said, "you've been hard to find." "I didn't ask to be found," she said calmly. A murmur passed between the men. The Reverend stepped forward. "Your kinfolk in town are mighty worried," he said. "They sent word with concern for your condition. This ain't the place for a woman alone with babes." "She isn't alone," Tohi said behind her, stepping to her side. The Reverend blinked. The rest stiffened. One man placed a hand near his rifle. Evelyn stood straighter. "You weren't worried when I was giving birth with no roof and no fire. You weren't worried when they sent riders with torches." "Rumors," Dalton said quickly. "No proof. And besides, folks thought you'd gone off the edge. Grief, isolation, mixed blood," he coughed into his sleeve. "Well, it's enough to confuse a woman's mind." Her fingers tightened around the sling. "You've got no claim to this land," said the man with the branding iron. "It's owned, staked and sealed by the Marrow name. And your girls," he paused, eyeing Tohi, "ain't gonna be raised in a cave by a savage." Tohi didn't flinch, but Evelyn did. She stepped forward. "My daughters," she said evenly, "will not grow up where women are measured by wounds and silence." "They're not safe here," the Reverend insisted. "There's laws. There's standards." She glanced at the men. 6 of them, shoulders squared like fences. They saw her as a mistake, a threat, a claim to something they believed they owned. Even her children were property in their eyes, something to divide and correct. "A woman is not soil to be claimed," she said softly. Dalton frowned. "You're not thinking clearly, Evelyn." "I've never thought clearer." They shifted, uncertain now. Tohi stepped beside her, hand resting lightly near his belt, not threatening, just present. Solid. The dog from earlier barked again, down in the trees. "You'll come back with us," Dalton said, "or we'll take it to court. You won't win there." She almost laughed. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to live. The Reverend cleared his throat. At least let the girls go. Let us place them with a proper home, with women who can raise them right. Evelyn smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. You mean women who'll teach them to be small, to keep their mouths shut when men misname them, to wait for rescue that never comes. They're just babies. They're watching everything. The silence that followed was heavy, but not endless. The men conferred in low voices. Evelyn stood her ground, legs trembling under the weight of memory and fear and resolve. But she didn't bend. Eventually, Dalton stepped back. We'll be watching, he warned. You raise those girls wrong, it won't just be us that pays the price. Evelyn didn't answer. She turned toward the fire. Her daughters pressed close. Her eyes lifted to the hills beyond the ridge. She waited until the last footstep faded into the trees. Then she sat. Tohi sat beside her. The girls stirred in their sling, fingers twitching. They'll come back, she whispered. Yes. She looked at him. Are you afraid? He tilted his head. Of what? She couldn't say. Of loss, maybe. Of fire again. Of how many times a woman could choose herself before the world punished her for it. Instead, she leaned her head on his shoulder. Just for a breath. He didn't move. That night, they built the fire higher than usual. Let it crackle and glow. The girls slept between them in the cradle he had made. Evelyn kept her knife near, not because she expected violence, but because she was done pretending peace came without vigilance. She thought of the Reverend's eyes, the sheriff's silence, the way they looked at her girls like problems. They would return, yes. But so would she. Every day, again and again. As long as her daughters breathed, Evelyn would meet the world at the door, spine straight, knife sharp, and soul intact. She did not belong to the town. She did not belong to any man's legacy. She belonged to herself, and the world would learn to live with it. Evelyn felt it in her bones before she heard anything. An old instinct carved from fire and childbirth and watching men lie with kind eyes. She had been hanging wet blankets on the rope stretched between two pine trunks, the girls playing in the shade near her feet, stacking small rocks in uneven towers. A bluebird flashed through the sky, but it was too quiet. No rabbit stirred. Even the creek had gone shy. Tohi emerged from the trees with a string of fish slung over one shoulder. He paused halfway to the fire pit, his brow furrowing. His silence wasn't stillness, it was attention. Then they heard it. Footsteps, just one man, but hurried and deliberate. A branch snapped. Tohi turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. Evelyn stepped in front of the girls, her hands moving fast, but without panic, lifting them, settling them into the carry sling against her chest. She pressed a kiss to each warm forehead and whispered nothing, just breathed them in. The man stumbled into view a moment later, soaked from crossing the stream below. It was Edgar's cousin, Clayton, the youngest of them, the one who used to stammer around her like a boy sniffing at manhood, who once offered to help her fetch water, and then watched her bend to tie her shoe instead. His face was raw with cold and sun. His boots were worn to holes. He didn't speak right away. He looked at her, then at the girls. And then he looked at Tohi. Evelyn saw it all, the flicker of fear, the calculation, the shame that followed close behind like a second shadow. I came alone, he said, breath ragged. They don't know I'm here. Tohi didn't move. I just wanted... Clayton took one step forward, hands raised. I just wanted to see. They kept saying the girls were sick, that you were twisted by Indian ways, that you'd got witchy in the canyon and turned wild. Evelyn stared at him. Do they look sick? He blinked. The girls peeked over her shoulder, curious but not afraid. No, he murmured. No, they don't. She shifted her weight, the knife hidden in her boot pressing against her ankle like a promise. I never agreed with them, Clayton said quickly. I told Uncle Thomas we should leave you be, that you weren't hurting anyone. Did you stop them when they lit my house on fire? Her voice wasn't angry. It was a calm colder than snow. He hesitated. I didn't start it. You didn't stop it. He looked down. Tohi still hadn't moved. His stillness felt like thunder about to choose a direction. They're coming, Clayton said. Tomorrow or the day after. With a preacher and a judge. They're saying they'll take the girls by force. Say you're living in sin. Say this isn't a fit home. They want to scare you into running. And if I don't, they'll make it righteous. Evelyn finished the thought for him. He nodded, ashamed. I thought if I came first, he said, you might have time to run. Hide deeper. Leave the girls with someone who... Evelyn raised a hand. No more, she said. Clayton's lips trembled. I didn't come to hurt you. I know, she said. But you're not brave enough to help me either. He flinched as if struck. She turned her back on him and walked toward the cradle, setting the girls down with careful hands. They reached for each other, always each other first, like they were born knowing how to survive as a pair. Tohi stepped beside her. What do we do? She asked softly. He placed one hand on her shoulder. It was not possessive. It was grounding. We don't run, he said. That night they prepared. Tohi set a perimeter, trip lines with bells, decoys in the trees, branches snapped at deliberate angles. Evelyn gathered what food she could carry on her back. The girls were swaddled tight, sleeping deep. She oiled the knife, and when her hands shook, Tohi stilled them. You are the storm, he whispered. She didn't know if he meant it literally. She didn't care. The first horse was heard before dawn. This time they came quiet. 6 men, maybe more. No torches. No shouting. Just silent, upright riders in long coats, hats pulled low. The kind of silence that stinks of verdicts already written. Evelyn stood in the center of the ridge clearing, the cradle behind her, the fire low, her daughters awake and bundled to her chest. Tohi was out of sight, but she felt him near, like breath on the back of her neck. A man in a preacher's collar rode forward and dismounted. He looked clean, polished, smug. Mrs. Marrow, he said, I've come to take the children. She didn't speak. You've been deemed unfit. The court will confirm it. Half-blood orphans raised in squalor by a widow and a savage. Do you really think this ends well for you? She tilted her head. You ride into my home and call it squalor? It's not a home, he said. It's a hiding place. You live like animals. Evelyn stepped forward, one hand on the knife. I've kept them fed through 2 storms. Kept them warm with my own body. Held them while my skin split from frost. I have heard every scream, every laugh. I know which daughter cries when she's hungry and which when she's lonely. I know what song will make them sleep and what silence means something's wrong. Her voice didn't shake. It rose, slow and fierce, like the sun over the canyon. Tell me, she said, who among you knows them better? No one answered. She pulled the knife free from her belt and held it loose in her hand. Not pointed, not brandished. Just present. You will not take them. One man reached for his rifle. Tohi's arrow landed at his feet. The man froze. A second arrow hit the preacher's horse's bridle, slicing leather clean. The preacher backed up fast, face pale. More shadows moved in the trees. Others Evelyn didn't know. 2 more Apache men, maybe 3. She hadn't seen them arrive. She realized now she'd never known how much of this land Tohi had been watching, how many debts he'd paid forward in silence. This is sacred land, Tohi said, stepping into the clearing. You trespass. You bring lies. Dalton, the sheriff, emerged from behind a tree, rifle lowered. Back off, he warned. This ain't a war. Tohi's eyes narrowed. Then don't act like soldiers. Dalton looked at Evelyn. Is this really the life you want? Raising girls to believe the world's against them. Evelyn smiled, and it wasn't soft. I'm raising girls who will know when the world lies to them. She stepped closer to him. And when it does, they'll already know how to stand. A long silence. Birds stirred. The fire hissed. Dalton lowered his rifle. Go home, he said to the others. You can't, the preacher started. I said go home. One by one, they turned. Their coats flapped like broken sails as they disappeared down the slope. Clayton lingered at the edge of the trees. Evelyn met his gaze. He touched the brim of his hat and left without speaking. When the wind stilled again, the fire crackled louder. Tohi exhaled and returned to her side. He did not speak. The girls had fallen asleep against her chest. She kissed their foreheads, one after the other. The fire hadn't taken her. The hunger hadn't. The men hadn't. So nothing will. She turned to Tohi and smiled. Let's finish the house.